Hello, Rashmi. Thank you so much for coming on the Soul Aligned Self Care podcast. Welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing so well. So grateful to be here, Tina. Thank you for having me.
Yes, to get started, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and maybe share a little bit of your story, how you got there.
You bet. So I actually was born in India and I lived there until I was 12 or so in a very large extended family that practiced things like yoga, meditation, Ayurveda very regularly. And immigrated to the United States with my nuclear family when I was 12 to a very tiny coal mining town in southwestern Virginia, where I sort of had to lose all aspects of that Indianness in order, and there's adolescence and all that and really missed a lot of that as I was growing up and really truly was sort of longing for it. I fast forward to college and then I went to medical school at the University of Virginia. And during my college years, I was sort of like this closet meditator. And I was too embarrassed to tell anyone. I was sometimes literally in a closet, but also there was a group of meditators that we would get together and I would be like, oh, I'm going to the library, but I'd go meditate. And so that was kind of the one thread that I'd had with my upbringing was this idea of yoga meditation, but I didn't know how to use it in my life sort of on a very regular basis until, again, abandoned it all during medical training, during residency and all of that. And then as a young attending, I had kids fairly quickly after residency, and I had them fairly close together. And I was working full time. My husband was working full time, and it was just like a bit of a firestorm that was going on inside of my own mind body system for a very long period of time, year after year, where I just sort of felt disconnected from my life, felt like, yeah, everyone that's looking in, it literally looks like I'm leading this perfect life, right? Like I have the kids, I have the husband, I have the house, I have the car, I have the job, I have all the things, but like this isn't working for me. And it
Yeah,
was a very slow churn burnout. I would try to arrange some things in my circumstance or rearrange some things, and maybe it would work for a short period of time. But I wasn't really turning inward the way that I probably should have for many, many years. And Tina, I know your story too is a lot of times we are almost like disregard whether it's our emotional, health, wellness. That's what I was doing. I was
yeah,
definitely
completely.
ignoring my mental health, my emotional health for sure. And it wasn't until I got physically ill that I started to be like, okay, something has to happen.
Yeah,
And I started to have chronic daily migraines. I had all kinds of scans. There were things showing up on the scans. I had really chronic GI issues. I mean, a lot of this stuff was 100% stress induced that I didn't understand. And, everyone that I was around was also super stressed. All of my physician friends were burned out and super stressed. And all my patients were burned out and super stressed. And I had no tools that I could teach them. And it was literally one day where I just decided to sit down for just a 3-minute meditation and I got some results out of it. And so I was like, okay, I think I need to get back into this practice. And that's how I started to kind of trace my way back to, I suppose, my youth, my ancestry, whatever we want to call it, this way that felt really aligned for me to take care of myself, which just meant doing nothing for a short period of time, which was
absolutely.
very triggering for me
Hmm.
and can still be triggering for people if you say just sit down and do nothing. I mean, that doesn't feel very good, right?
Hmm.
So all that to say that I am, I've been a family physician for 24 years. I've also started to be a meditation teacher, and this was about 14 years ago. And the reason that I signed up to be a meditation teacher back then was there was no other community that I could find where I could get some in-depth like knowledge and also accountability. Like I had to sign on a dotted line that said, if I join this program, for the next 18 months, I promise I'll meditate every day. And apparently that's what I needed. I didn't know that at the time, right? I was like, yes, please hold me accountable. And so that really kicked off this whole other set of doors for me over the last, 14, 15 years or so of training in Ayurveda, of deeper meditative practices. And of course, that opened up to coaching. And so now really I host in-person retreats that are meditation retreats. I also host a membership circle that I've had for several years, and I do one-on-one coaching, and all of that to say that it started with me turning inward to say, how can I heal myself? Because what's happening is not okay with me.
Yeah, there's so many things in that story that I'm like, wow, like you lived in India till you were 12. And so you had like a really good some really good impressions, I would expect, right? And then going to Virginia of all places, what could be the most polar opposite place to go to? You
Right.
know?
Oh, I mean, the population was 2,000 and I would say probably, because I was in urban India, just my tiny
Oh my
microcosm
God.
was probably, 8,000 in just like the couple streets that I lived in. So it
Crazy.
was a big difference.
Huge difference. Yeah, Virginia. Yeah, especially, yeah, I live in a town that's less than 1,000 right now. So I can kind of get a feel for where you were. And beautiful place, just
Right.
beautiful, but
Absolutely.
rough, like rough, hard to live there. Like, so I can appreciate that. And then when you were talking about your medical training and having kids like right after your residency, which is mind blowing. And my son's partner is and in his residency right now. So I know exactly how busy that could be. It's, they sometimes they don't see each other for a couple of days. And just I can't imagine the stress that that put on your system because you didn't have like that space to exhale. And your story, like you said, we have it's very similar, different, obviously different places of employment and stuff like that, but it's like that constant, like real, like you said, firestorm that was very relatable to me for years. So it's not just, it doesn't happen like quickly, it's not just like a short amount of stress. It's like hardcore stress for a long period of time, which is the common denominator for, it's like a recipe for disaster in your health, your system. And it really manifests for different people in different ways. And,
Right.
so it's like, and different things work for different people. And one of the things I want to point out, I'm a meditation teacher also, and I love creating meditations. And I was someone who really struggled to meditate. I have the same problem with the do nothing kind of a thing because we're so trained to constantly doing our worth. We're taught by society that our worth is based on our what we do, and how much doing are you doing and how hard are you
100%.
working, how busy are you, and
Yeah.
we wear it like a badge of honor, and it's like, oh, how are you? And it's like, oh, I'm so busy, I'm doing this
Right.
and this, so it's like we're not supposed to not be to doing nothing. And so
Right.
when we stop for a moment and we're doing nothing, we feel like we should be doing something. We feel maybe guilt sometimes, just
Oh, for
putting,
sure.
we're not even doing anything for ourselves and we feel guilty. So it's so
Right.
hard for people to step into like that self-care. But something you said about the meditation that really struck me, that really helped me start to become a regular meditator and then turn into a creator of meditations and a teacher, which if you told me that 5 years ago, I would have laughed very hard.
Oh, same,
So,
same. I mean, yeah,
but
like I said, it was, yeah, not never meant to be a vocation. It was like,
yeah.
please sign me up because I need to sign this piece of paper.
Yeah. And what you said was, you could start small, you don't have to. A lot of people think or assume that meditations have to look a certain way, and they look differently for everybody, and you have to make it your own practice. And yeah, you could start with a 3-minute guided meditation, and it's going to make a difference in your life. It makes a big difference. I have an exercise I do, it's a meditation I created called Take Five, and it's really about doing exactly what you said, learning how to sit still and do nothing and feel good about it. And taking that moment to check in with yourself. Because one of the things that I did when I was going through my little firestorm that you talked about was I lost the connection with myself. I wasn't even connected enough to know when I was sick. I wasn't connected enough to know I was even tired until my body started shaking from exhaustion. I just lost every connection. And so people need to learn at the very least to take a step back and just take a few deep breaths and sit for a moment with yourself and just maybe check in with yourself the same way you would check in with your mom and dad or your children or your partner, and just be like, how are you? What do you need right now in this moment? And I just think it's so important. So the work that you're doing right now, especially, I think you're focused on working with a lot of
I do.
physicians, right?
I do. I
Yeah.
do.
I think it's very well needed. As with any other profession, you always tend to take care of the one thing that you're offering people out in the world with yourself at the very least. So, like, if you're the painter, your house needs to get painted. If you're the plumber, you have the leaky pipes. If you're the physician, you're not taking care of your health. So,
Right. Well, we're rewarded not to take care of our health. In fact, we're conditioned not to take care of our health, and we're actually shamed if we rest in medicine. That's a fact. I mean, that's exactly what
wow.
my lived experience was, and it is even now for these kids going through medical training. There's a lot of shame around feeling tired. There's a lot of shame around, needing to rest or even just needing to sleep for 7 hours every night, which I certainly didn't have for whatever it was, 6 years or so. It's an interesting hypocrisy, really, right? Like we're telling people what to do, but yet we aren't actually given the permission to do it ourselves in training.
Hmm.
And so we end up becoming trained to disconnect because it's no longer safe because it's so painful in the body. And ultimately, you were talking about that same disconnection that you felt. I think it's a really common thing, and it's a
Hmm.
protective mechanism.
Yeah, it's kind of scary once I realized what was going on, which I didn't like. Even at the time, I was like, "Oh, my body is starting to shake. I think I might be tired." I would say to myself, "That's ridiculous." And now, after I went through the vertebral dissection and then the stroke and then all that other stuff, looking back and learning how to take care of myself and take a step back, which is still challenging to this day. I have to be intentional about it. It doesn't come naturally to me, and I'm not sure if it ever will, right? But I didn't realize, I was like, "Oh," I look back at those times and I'm like, I was just completely disconnected with my body and myself, and I was in fight or flight and in survival. And I wonder I wonder if your industry could ever change for the better. It almost feels like they're trying to break these kids. Like, and I know they're not kids. To me, they're kids, but
Yeah,
um
no, they are to me
it,
too.
yeah, so I'm just like, are they trying to make them break down? Are they trying to weed them out or something? Or what are they trying to do to these poor souls?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, it does certainly the amount of knowledge and the amount of experience necessary to be a good physician is it's extensive, and no one will ever know everything they ever need to know. So, like, that those parts are true, but I do think that as more women start to be in charge, that I think there will be more compassion. Not to say that men don't have compassion, but a lot of times there's sort of this toxic sort of masculinity that gets passed down. That certainly was the water that I was swimming in
Hmm.
medical school and in residency and things like that. Sort of like tough it up. You'll have time to sleep when you die. Those types
Yeah.
of things, right? And so certainly as a woman, you're not going to be the one to ask for help. You're not going to, because then no, I'm going to work harder. I'm going to do the things. And so I think it's a good question. I don't think it's intentional. I also don't know that it can change as quickly as it should, although there are a
Yeah.
lot, a lot of noise being made. There is noise being made about why don't we actually shift into a more compassionate way of training our physicians, of training people. Even more importantly, all of my physician friends in big academic centers who are all attendings in private practice, who are all employed by big hospital systems, they are realizing they are just pawns, right? They are pawns in a big giant chess match
Hmm.
that involves big pharma, big hospital systems, and big insurance companies. Patients are pawns and doctors are pawns. And so that type of loss of just like the capacity to help in a creative way that we can is just very demoralizing as well. So I think the pressures mount from many different places for physicians this day and age.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point because I hear a lot of people really placing a lot of the blame on the collapsing of the healthcare system on doctors. And they think the doctors are greedy and the doctors are this, and I'm like, the doctors are actually being held hostage and they're in an impossible situation.
Right.
especially you have some doctors who have put themselves through medical school. They have
Right.
enormous, enormous student loan debt,
That's right.
so much responsibility. It's a hole that they couldn't possibly get out of. And so they're basically being held hostage. And they're pawns, exactly as you said. And I think it's really sad. And you're seeing more physicians like speak out about this a lot. I
That's right.
see it on social media, I see it on TikTok sometimes, and it's like I think they should speak out about it more. And I know it's probably hard for them to speak out about it for obvious reasons.
Right.
But I think it's really important because we need to realize that most people don't become doctors to be some kind of a evil,
That's
like,
so funny.
you
There
know,
yeah, it's there's not enough money in the world for that, that's for sure,
yeah.
like, these people are usually very smart, they can go do anything else that they want to, but this is just a very passion-driven, job that people are looking for.
Yeah, and I think you need to look at, where to place the blame. Not that it does any, it's not very useful placing blame, but it is better for you to understand what's going on and be maybe a little more compassionate. I try to have compassion. Sometimes it's frustrating, equally as frustrating for the person, the patient,
Right,
trying to get care and they can't get care or
right,
whatever
right.
the issue might be. They can't get prescription drugs, that whatever it is, it's equally as frustrating, but you have to have compassion for the other person on the other side that is being held hostage just as much as you are. And I think it's really important for us to note that and make a point of that. But to get back into how you help other physicians, I am
Yeah.
very curious because I'm sure everything you do could help anyone that's suffering from stress, overwhelm, anxiety, burnout, whatever it might be, all under the same category. I'm sure there's some specific things that you do when you work with physicians, and I'm curious, like where you start with them. Is there like a baseline? I'm going to help you heal your nervous system first, and then we'll go into different ways you can support yourself after you feel more healed and you're in a better place. Or how do you usually start with them?
Yeah, I love that question. And I actually do have a big subset of very stressed, very, very overworked attorneys, as well as the physicians as
Me
well.
too. Yes.
And
Yes.
they, like you said, all of us humans need help, and we all need some community in which we can all heal. And so I would say this question is so good because there is a system, and yet it is, let's meet you where you are at the subset of that system. And I would say if there was any one overarching theme, Tina, it would be this sense of bringing softness to ourselves, bringing self-compassion into whatever is happening in that moment, bringing awareness and self-compassion. And that in and of itself, as you know, that can be a whole lifetime of practice of befriending ourselves, of bringing in softness during the really trying times, during times where we've made mistakes, during times when, we haven't been aligned with who we say we are. All of those things can start to, yeah, that actually can start to regulate the nervous system and help us come into that ventral vagal state in and of itself, just having some softness. So I would say if there's any one theme that runs through every piece of work that we do, it is, let's bring in some softness here, because usually what's happening, there's a lot of hard edges everywhere we look. And we think in order to get from point A to point B, we have to sort of flagellate ourselves. And we think that if we have had a lot of success, that, which of course everyone has achieved quite a lot, they think it's because of that really mean inner voice. And we know neuroscience tells us that's not true. It's actually the opposite. That's the part that actually creates drag on our journeys. And so we really start with self-compassion, and then we just start to bring in awareness. And as you know, as a meditation teacher, oftentimes that is the solvent. That is the solvent that actually can then start to lead to just even asking a question, what do I need right now? And sometimes the answer is really simple. It's like, oh my gosh, I haven't drank any water all day today. Let me take a sip of water. And that already brings in some healing. And so it's really small steps, and it's really consistent small steps over a long period of time that takes us to where we really are looking to get to. But I think beyond anything else, it's this idea of turning towards ourselves with softness that makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you're right. It's very hard for any type of person that has maybe a type A or even just somebody who's had to work really hard to kind of let go a little bit because they feel like they're going to lose everything that they've worked for. And you're right. Sometimes you have to slow down and realize that will actually help you. It'll help you think clearer. It'll help you make better decisions. It'll help you improve your relationships. And that includes business relationships at work. And so it actually helps you have more success when you learn how to slow down. And having compassion for yourself, I would think, is an extremely important thing for a physician to have, because how can you have compassion for other people if you can't even have compassion for yourself? And so I think that it goes hand in hand. Um, I always say to people, treat yourself at least as well as you treat your best friend, as well as you treat your mother, as well as you treat your partner. You treat them with love. Would you talk to them that way? Well, don't talk to
Right.
yourself that way. So how do you treat your patients? You care about them, you love them, you want the best for them, and you need to have that same compassion for yourself. It's so important. And what you just said about the small consistent steps over a long period of time, that just makes such a huge difference. And I just want to emphasize the point of those small steps, because sometimes when you're in this state of stress, you're like, everything, as you said, all the edges are hard, and it just seems so overwhelming. Something that's so unreachable is peace and ease in your life. You just like that, I can't possibly have that, especially when there's no one representing that in your field, or very few people representing that type of life in your field. And so this could seem like a just overwhelming thing to be able to reach for. And so you don't start, you don't even try sometimes. And so it could take just this small little thing, like I said, that take five thing, or just like a 3-minute guided meditations, or stepping outside, letting the sunlight hit your face for a few seconds,
Right.
right? And just taking a deep breath. I'm a huge fan of breath work. Also, I'm certified as a breath work instructor, and
Brilliant.
breath work was the thing that really was magical for me. It helped me lower my blood pressure and keep my blood pressure down. And
Yep.
so taking a few deep breaths can be so powerful. It could just bring you back into your body and out of that. I call it riding on the hamster wheel. You got your blinders on and you're like, "Chut, chut, 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 go." Have you ever watched a hamster on a hamster wheel?
Yeah.
That's what a lot of us are doing all day long. We're like,
Right.
we're
Right.
not paying
Right.
attention. And I
Yeah.
just want to emphasize to everybody who's listening that it's not always a huge step that you have to take. It's those little tiny little moments that you give yourself, you know, just a little bit of peace, a little bit of compassion to slow down and check in. And that's all you need, like you said, to just get started. And once you break that shell or that hardness, like you said, I love that. It's very visual for me. Um, then you could kind of step into going deeper in some areas of your life. And I think that that's a beautiful place to start. I can't think of anything better. Um, yeah, so I feel like a lot of the people you work with probably seem quite overwhelmed. Uh, do you come up against that often, where they're so overwhelmed that they can't even imagine a life where they could have that ease in their life?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, we're talking about, surgeons who are like, working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week sometimes, and never seeing their families, never seeing the sun. There's like any one of us humans would feel overwhelmed at that point, right? And
Mhm.
also then disconnect from ourselves and use whatever the heck we can to just survive from one day to the other, huge amounts of caffeine, not enough sleep, like all the things. And I would say yes, but also by the time they start to turn inward, they know that they have almost had it at that point, right? And so no matter how many tools there are out there for us, even if I had, like when I was whatever, 23, 24, when I was in training, if someone had said, "Oh my gosh, you should meditate every day. This is so good for you. Here's all the science," I'd be like, "I don't have time, forget about it." But it wasn't until I hit the wall over and over again that then I said, "Okay, well, now I'm ready." And so I think ultimately by the time, and I'm sure it's the same way for you, but there's a bit of an application process for anyone to come and work with me, and part of that is just assessing, what is their readiness? Sometimes people aren't quite ready, and sometimes
Mhm.
maybe we need to, redirect them to maybe some therapy for a while. Like there's no one perfect time or place, but I think once someone has said, "I'm curious, I don't think this is all there is in my life," then the doors start to open. But we have
Mhm.
to get to that ourselves. No
Yeah.
one can tell no one can tell us that. And so that's often the case is there's a huge amount of overwhelm, but there's also a sense of curiosity and hope that's there, as to what else is there. And oftentimes we do have to sneak in 2-minute breathwork practices a day, 3-minute meditations a day, for there to be just enough of a space to then walk through to maybe a yoga class a week and see how that goes, right? Because ultimately, no one has time to meditate. No one has time to do breath work. Like
Mhm.
that doesn't exist. And so you have to, everyone has competing priorities. And so ultimately, it is how can I make this a priority? And usually, right, the brain's fight or flight kind of response system, the amygdala, will forgive a 2-minute practice. You can kind of bypass that alarm system.
Mhm.
Same thing for like a 3-minute meditation,
Yeah.
and then you can kind of start to increase that just little by little by little. So I would say yes to the overwhelm, and I would also say there are ways to kind of skirt around that with still a sense of softness without causing too much disruption because if I go to someone and say, you should meditate 60 minutes a day, it's gonna be a full shutdown, it's gonna be
Oh
no,
god.
it's gonna be gone,
I
right?
shut down. I shut down to that.
Right, 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 right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was recently in a 90-minute yoga class and I always just take 60-minute yoga classes. And it was like, it was a lot for me. But
Mhm.
meaning like for me to say on this day, I'm gonna be in yoga for 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And it was great. It was beautiful. It was perfect. But
Oh,
it
yeah.
took a hurdle for me in my mind to move past the 60-minute mark. And it was worth
Mhm.
every minute of it, of course.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's certain things that just throw me off immediately. And I did a breathwork session that was about an hour long, and it was
Yeah.
really powerful. But it's almost like the experience of doing yin yoga for me. And for those
Yep.
of you who don't know what yin yoga is, it's when you stay in a pose for a really long time. And it could be kind of challenging and uncomfortable. And to me, it's just like the perfect metaphor for life when you're in like that transitional stage of your life where you're going from one stage to the other and you're just like waiting, you're in like that limbo. That's what yin yoga feels like for me. And it's just this really good lesson. But that's exactly how I feel when I'm doing something for a long time. It's almost like my skin is crawling. I'm like, this is really good. But at the same time, I just want to get up and run around. That was good. I'm done. I'm done. After 30 minutes, I was done. But I stuck with it and went through the whole practice. And it probably would have been easier because of what I do. I was curious about it and I wanted to experience the full experience, and that's why I stuck with it. But if it was just me, Tina, not the coach, Tina, I probably wouldn't have done an hour. I probably wouldn't have even signed up for that. And so that was a big step for me. And the same thing with the 90-minute yoga class. Um, until you get there, it's just like this big hurdle. But then once you're there, you're like, okay, I'm here. So I'm just gonna collapse into this and just enjoy it. So I think that that's a really good point. And one of the exercises that I do with a lot of my clients is I call it decluttering. And I started doing this in a way to teach people how much space they have in their lives. And so I do decluttering the mind, decluttering the space, and then decluttering processes. And it's amazing how I could go through with a client, so to speak, all the processes that they use in a day. Like, how do they wash the dishes? How do they get ready in the morning? How do they go to work? How do they get their kids ready for school? And I go through all the processes and we remove any friction from those processes. And, you can gain sometimes an extra hour in your week. And this is really to help them gain that time that they need in order to, add in these self-care practices, but it's also really to make them realize that, wow, I really do have these spaces. I have that 5 minutes when I'm waiting for my coffee to brew in the morning, or I have that 5 minutes when I'm sitting in the pickup line at school for my kids where I could take a few deep breaths. I don't know, I actually have no idea what it's like to be a physician, so I couldn't really give you any examples, but I'm sure you could have some, in your head of examples of where you could create that space and then set an anchor, like every day when I'm waiting for my coffee to brew, I'm going to take, 5 really deep conscious breaths, and close my eyes and ask myself how I'm feeling, so it's like you're anchoring into another activity, or when I brush my teeth, I'm going to do this, or when I take a shower. I don't know if you should do deep breathing in the shower, but
Right, right.
there's space. There's all these little spaces that we don't even realize we have, and it's not really to like over. It's not about over planning yourself and making your schedule efficient so you could fill those spaces. It's about creating those spaces so that you have things that can flow into it that are beneficial to your healthy lifestyle, and not adding to your schedule. Hopefully most people won't add things in that just make them busier. So it's a really great way to help people realize that they do have some space for these practices. And I think it's really important for them to realize that it's just not another thing that they have to add on to that huge list they have, because most people don't need that. I know that.
Yes, yes. I think letting go is a big theme for sure. And what is it that we can let go of? And oftentimes there's tiny things, there's big things, there's repetitive things, there's ruminations, there's all kinds of things that I
Hmm.
think once we start letting go, which is what you're referring to with the, decluttering process,
Hmm.
um, just space and possibilities start to open up.
Yeah. If you had some advice for anybody who's experiencing the type of stress that we've talked about, you and I have both experienced this, and I feel like it's more common than most people realize. I feel like a lot of people, and I want to tell these stories over and over again because I feel like a lot of people feel very alone. I felt very alone when I was going through this. I was a single mom, and it's being a single mom is really kind of frowned upon. I lost a lot of my friends when I got divorced. Um, it was almost like they didn't want a single woman hanging around in their little crowd. I got a lot of rejection from that. I was kind of distanced from my family, not emotionally, but I was 2.5 hours away from family. So I didn't have the family support. So I didn't really have a lot of support. And all my friends were married. I felt just really alone. I was in it all by myself, which really isn't true. Like if I really tried, I could definitely not be alone. But I feel like a lot of people feel that way. And when we tell these stories, somebody is going to relate to it, right? But what kind of advice would you give to somebody in this situation right now who's just getting started, who doesn't know anything about meditation or breath work or any of these somatic practices to help their nervous system heal? What advice would you give them to help them get started?
Yeah, I really like this example that you just gave me, where there was a sense of being alone, and that isolation was actually contributing to the mental, emotional, and physical stressors that you were facing. And I think
Mhm.
that's very true. In fact, if you look at what's happened, loneliness as an epidemic has shot up just societally, and certainly COVID kind of almost made that an accelerated growth because we all got used to being very separate, right? Like when I was growing up in India, I mean, we literally probably had like at dinner at minimum, it would be probably 15, 16 people, but sometimes it's like 40 people by the time you have cousins and
Wow.
their friends, right? So like, I mean, you wouldn't have wanted to be the person cooking for all those people, but sometimes it would be like cousins are just here, they're passing through town. Now there's 30 people and everybody's kind of sleeping on the floor type of thing. And you go from that, and even in India this has changed as well to what's happening now, which is we're basically just texting each other, or we're seeing each other every month or something like that. And on a day-to-day basis, especially if you're working from home, you really have lost a lot of that in-person connection. And I think that is rising. And what we know for sure is time spent alone can be healing if it has certain intentions, right? So there's solitude, like me going for a walk every morning. I love it. I'm alone. I want that alone time. I crave it. That is solitude. It's very healing, right? And so, but I often find myself reaching for things I don't need to eat, like, because then I'm like, what am I doing? And it's because
Mhm.
I am feeling this emptiness, this loneliness inside of me. And so only we know when we have stepped away from solitude, which is healing, into loneliness, which is actually very dangerous for our health. And so even just recognizing, yeah, I'm feeling really lonely can be the biggest game changer. And then for goodness sakes, taking out the stigma from whatever, shame that arises from feeling lonely or alone, right? Like we have to speak it out loud so that
Mhm.
when shame is spoken out loud, it cannot survive. And so I think even just speaking out loud, it makes sense. And then making one small decision to re-regulate yourself and co-regulate with another being. So what we know from polyvagal theory, from lots and lots of trauma work, is it doesn't have to be another human being. Oftentimes, I'm working with people who are always around people. They live in, big cities, but there's not one safe person for them that they feel safe with, and that's okay. We often start with, is it your coach? Is it your therapist? Is it your dog? Because dogs can co-regulate with us, cats can co-regulate with us. So oftentimes it's just finding that one other safe being to co-regulate with initially so that we can start to make decisions for ourselves that feel nourishing rather than harming us. I would say if that's the only thing that people can kind of, just move into or open into is being open to the sense of like co-regulating, then healing begins, and then we can start to make lots and lots of different decisions for ourselves.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I think that's just a great answer because community is so important. And I don't know if you're familiar with blue zones, but that's
Yeah,
like, yeah, that's one
the
of
one
the
big thing,
things.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
And the first time that I learned about blue zones, and if the listeners haven't learned about blue zones yet, I'll put a link in the show notes because it's really cool to sign up for their newsletter and learn more about it. But community is one of the big things, and I think the one that really resonated with me was in Japan, where they're almost put into these groups when they're little, and these women stay in these groups together. I'm sure the men do it too, but I was very focused on the women, and they help each other with everything. They support each other through everything for their entire lives. And some of the people that they talk to in these communities are in their 80s and they've been together for their entire lives. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And here I feel like we're almost once again by I don't know if it's intentional or by default that we're almost forced to be separate in the United States and maybe some other countries also. And we're almost encouraged to look out for yourself and not look out for your community. It's very interesting in some of the different places. I've moved around a lot with my ex-husband's job. We moved probably 8 times. And then even after that, I moved a few times. And it's interesting to see the different communities and how some of them are very um, they just move really quickly. People from, in and out, you don't have any connection with your neighbors. And then some of them are just so connected, and it has nothing to do with big town, small town either. It's just a different feel for the communities. I'm not sure what creates that atmosphere. If I knew that, I would try to recreate that every place I lived because loneliness is, can be really painful. And I heard somebody say, and I don't know if this is true, but they compared it to smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. The
No,
effect that,
there's data to back that up. Yeah.
yeah. So it's really not good. And I go in and out of that because I live by myself. I work from home. I do have my dog, but very recently I had two dogs. One of them passed away and it's so quiet. And so like now it's just me and the one dog and I feel like this sounds very strange, but I just feel like a deeper connection with the one dog and that dog is maybe something that
Yeah. Oh
regulates
yeah.
me.
I make it a point to co-regulate with my dog when I'm working
Yes.
alone. She's like always around me and she
Hmm.
loves it and I love it and it works great.
Yeah, yeah. And often think, what would I do without this dog? I would have to like move. I really
Right.
would. Like I
Right.
couldn't live in a community where there's less than 1,000 people. I don't, there's weeks that go by that I don't see people people besides my close family and maybe one close friend that I have that lives right in town here. And then seeing my children is often involves travel, so it's like that dog is my connection. And
Right.
so I think it's really important to make sure you have that connection because it can feel, and there are times where I just have this feeling, I'm like, I need to be around people. So I'll go visit one of my kids,
Right.
and just like kind of immerse myself into people. And you often hear from people that like live in New York City and places like that, how they experience loneliness.
I would say those are oftentimes people in the most dense cities are oftentimes, as far as like my one-on-one clients that I'm thinking of, they oftentimes are the ones that are battling really, really severe loneliness. And
Mm-hmm,
and that's because, I mean, I think there's a whole host of reasons for it, for sure. It's because, even like 30 years ago, 25 years ago, like we didn't have a grocery store around the corner all the time. We didn't have Instacart. We didn't have all the things that we have now. And
mm-hmm,
so even though there was a grocery store, I was thinking of this in my old house. I don't live there anymore, but we had this little cul-de-sac where one person very intentionally would ask for things, like literally, like, do you have flour? Can I run by
mm-hmm,
it? Of course, we would probably have flour, right? Like, but it was a very vulnerable ask, right? Because yes, they could have gone down to the store. That was a 15-minute drive, but they're like, I'm making this thing. And so then the next time I needed something, I would ask because I was like, oh, and then it would create just this way of us just like literally walking up to our neighbor's house and being like, hey, are you home? Like, do you have this?
mm-hmm,
And you just have a little conversation. And oftentimes it's those micro moments of connection that makes all the difference in the world. And then, there's like, oh, are you going to the food trucks on Friday? Yeah, I'll meet you there. Like those kinds of things. This one neighbor really was kind of the leader for that. And the rest of us kind of followed. Not everyone
mm-hmm,
followed, but the rest of us were like, yeah, this is interesting,
mm-hmm.
like let's swap things.
Yeah.
And that's also something that I do here, but it isn't with food. It's just like, there's all kinds of different clubs that you can create. And I run a book club, I run a few other things, just ways for us to get together that don't feel like they have to involve us going to a restaurant or making, a big deal out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can be a really big game changer as well. Just to have those as little frameworks almost throughout my week, because it was just too much. It was just too much time
Mm-hmm.
lapsed between what my nervous system was used to, which is like, seeing 35 patients a day, having a huge staff around me, and then going to, Zoom coaching, which is amazing. I am with people all the time. So it isn't
Mm-hmm.
that I'm not with people, but oftentimes I still crave that in-person kind of interaction.
Yeah, it's a different kind of connection when you're working or coaching because you have to be on, you really do.
Yeah,
And it's not where you're in this relaxed situation. You're doing a job, you have a purpose, and there's something that you want to achieve, and you have a responsibility too
right.
to take care of these people. And so it doesn't feel the same as when you're connecting with a good friend and you're just hanging out and whatever you're doing. And when you were talking about that, that community, like borrowing stuff from people, and I could think of one place that I lived where I had that. And it was just something that really happened naturally, where I just became friends. We were all kind of the same age, but not really. Like they were all different age groups. And it was like we started to have a game night, and then, that turned into like wine night. And but I knew at any time that I could go across the street to, you know, any of my three neighbors that lived across the street. And we were in like townhouses, right? So everybody was really close. And I could borrow anything from any one of them at any time. And it was, I didn't realize how special that was when I lived there. And
Right.
I became really, really good friends with a lot of those people and still talk to them today. And I had so much fun. And here, I can't really create that as much because it's very rural and the houses are far away. So it's a little bit different, but you can create that on a certain level. And I do have that to a certain degree in this area also. And I
Yeah,
think it's really important to, maybe if that's what you crave, maybe to be the person that is the first one to step out and
that's
try
it.
that. Yeah, and then the worst thing that could happen is the person could look at you like you're crazy and be like, no, and then maybe that's not the person you want to spend time with anyway. Maybe it just wasn't a good fit. So I think that that's a great note to end on with this conversation. That's a really good first step to take. And but if you could tell us, where do you hang out? Where can people connect with you?
So I have a podcast. It's called Inner Peace and Power, and we have conversations that are similar to this as well, where we're just diving deep into people's stories, into ways that they've healed, and the stories are just really incredible and always so mesmerizing for me. So Inner Peace and Power, it's on all platforms, and then my website is just my name. It's just rashmischram.com. You can kind of find anything that you want on that website. I do host in-person retreats. I do online membership programs as well. Those programs only open up once a quarter or so. And so I would love to, yeah, hang out with anyone. I'm on Instagram, all the things.
Okay, we'll put all that stuff in the show notes so people can connect with you. And once again, I want to thank you for coming on, and I want to thank you for the work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you so much, Tina. It's my pleasure.